Russia seems to be losing a lot of tanks in Ukraine. As of writing this, over 500 have been verified. The true number is likely higher, as it's less likely to get pictures of destroyed tanks in areas that are still controlled by Russia. Still, 500 sounds like a lot. That's more than Germany and the UK have active combined. The actual number of active tanks that Russia has in service isn't exactly clear. If you look around online, you'll likely find a wide array of numbers, but likely it's somewhere around 2,500. The number of those that are actually combat ready though might be closer to 2,000 or even less. Another number you'll often come across online is that Russia has 10,000 or even 20,000 plus tanks, which is pretty wildly different. These though include tanks that are in reserve and stored away for a potential future war, or just for spare parts. But where are they? It's almost impossible to find any lists of these locations that these sites use to count that 10 or 20,000 tanks. So I decided to spend countless hours searching through satellite imagery, following railroad lines in remote Siberia, looking at old Russian forums and websites, treaty agreements and their inspections, and more to find them. So how many do they really have? And how many can realistically ever be refurbished and brought back into active service if needed? But first, our sponsor, Raid Shadow Legends. You've definitely heard of them before. They've been real popular for a long time now, and they're celebrating their 3rd anniversary. Being that it's their birthday, here are my 3 favorite things I love about it. First, it's easy to get into and learn. So many mobile games now seem like they could be a lot of fun, but it just requires hours or even days of trying to figure everything out. Second, its graphics are incredibly impressive, by far the best I've ever seen on a mobile game. And finally, the strategy. For example, some enemies are more vulnerable to certain attacks, and some attacks are more powerful, yet they have a cooldown period, so you need to use them carefully. And again, being that it's their 3rd anniversary, they're kicking things off by giving free gifts to everyone, as well as adding a whole bunch of new content. New champions, artifact sets, as well as a fully personalized video showcasing everyone's raid journey and personal achievements. On top of that, monthly tournaments and special events with some of the best prizes ever. And this makes it a perfect time to join the raid community. If you haven't yet, click the link down in the description or just scan my QR code here and you'll get a huge birthday package worth $40. We're talking about 3 free champions at once, plus 10 magic XP brews, 10 force XP brews, and 10 spirit brews. All this treasure will be waiting for you right here. And since it's Raid's birthday, the gifts keep coming. All new and existing players can get a bunch of free birthday gifts worth over $25. Once you're in the game, after clicking on the links, just enter the promo code 3YearsRaid. And it's that easy. Just click the link down in the description and I'll see you in the game. Figuring out how many tanks Russia has and how many they have in storage is extremely difficult. Since the collapse of the Soviet Union, the Russian ground forces have been reformed many times. For example, the 129th Guard Machine Gun Artillery Division became the 17th Guard Motor Rifle Division in 2001. Then in 2009, it was downsized to become the 70th Independent Guard Motor Rifle Brigade. And then in late 2018, finally became the 114th Guards Motor Rifle Brigade of the 127th Motor Rifle Division, which itself was previously the 59th Independent Motor Rifle Brigade, which had changed from a Machine Gun Artillery Division in 2009. So, as you can see, this all makes it really hard to track and find up-to-date information. But, back to the point. Russia's ground forces have reserve bases where additional vehicles not in service are stored. Everywhere I looked, people seem to refer to them differently, such as Central Tank Reserve Bases, or other variations calling them armor, vehicle depots, storage and repair sites, etc. But there are about a dozen of these that I've found that are still operational that have tanks. First, the 22nd, located in Bai. We can see here roughly 500 tanks total, and a rough guess, maybe around half of them are salvageable. It also has several garages that could host roughly 300 more, at most, inside that we can't see. Next, the 1295th in Arsenyev. Most of the tanks here you can see are in real rough shape. There's roughly 1,000 total, maybe 250 of which could be refurbished. Next, the 2544th on the edge of Kozolka. Again, a lot of them here are in real bad condition. Also, poor satellite resolution makes distinguishing them difficult, but there's around 600, 350 of which are beyond any point of repair. The 1311th near Yekaterinburg has been shrinking over the years. Last satellite imagery shows about 250 tanks in total, most probably able to be brought back into service after some maintenance. Also, again, it has several garages that could hold a few hundred more, although unlikely. The 349th in Topchika has the largest number I've found, roughly 1,100 total. More than half of them look like they're in decent enough shape. The 103rd outside of Yarkovo used to be a massive reserve base with well over 3,000 tanks. Now, it has about 800, a majority of which are beyond repair. Next, the 227th in Ulan-Ude. It's another large base, and together with the active 5th Independent Guard Tank Brigade, making it somewhat more complicated to distinguish, but roughly 1,000 reserve tanks, 300 of them pass saving. The 70-24th, near the border of Ukraine, hosts mostly trucks and other military vehicles. However, in 2018, it began expanding and receiving several hundred tanks. Many of them are likely active and they're used in the war in Ukraine, but the latest satellite imagery accounted roughly 400, only 50 of which probably inoperable. Then there are a few small ones, like the 187th with only 50, one on Sakhalin Island with another 50 of what appears to be tanks, but they're covered, and then a few dozen at the 245th and Lesses-Davos. And finally, 2 other small central tank reserve bases that I could not find the number of. One in Obsk, which was previously the 71st Reserve Tank Division, unit number 14892. It has about 100 tanks, all appearing in decent shape. And the other with a military unit number of 75485, located in Kamyshlov, housing mostly other vehicles, but around 100 tanks. There's also many other that I found mentioned online, but satellite imagery has shown that they have been shut down in recent years, such as the Markovsky storage base in 2009. In fact, Russia has been rapidly decreasing its number of stored tanks over the past few decades. Today, based on what I found, Russia has roughly 6,000 tanks in storage. Of those, at best, maybe 3,000 of those appear that they could ever be brought back into service again. Now, that number is nearly half of what most sites you'll see online report, but again, it's worth noting that Russia has been shrinking its old tanks it has in storage. Back in the 90s, Russia had over 30,000 tanks. By 2005, 23,000, and 2015, about 12,000. Part of the reason for the drop was a treaty on conventional armed forces in Europe that was signed in 1990. It limited the total number of tanks in Europe by each side, the Warsaw Pact and NATO, to 20,000 each. Also, you might notice that a lot of the tanks I mentioned in storage are in Siberia, where many were moved partly because the treaty defined Europe as west of the Ural Mountains. The treaty was quickly complicated by the fact that the Warsaw Pact dissolved just 7 months after it was signed. The Soviet Union then ceased to exist a few months later, and eventually several Warsaw Pact countries joined NATO. Russia later suspended the treaty in 2007, so its impact today is mute. Another reason for the decline is it is extremely expensive to staff and maintain all those tanks. Each one requires both preventative maintenance, where they are each checked and repaired at least monthly, as well as corrective maintenance once they are ever attempted to be reactivated. Corrective maintenance is much more costly, especially if preventative maintenance is neglected. Vehicles don't do well sitting outside for years, let alone decades on end. They will rust inside and out, any oil and fluids left inside will damage its systems, engine and electrical components will seize up, and countless other problems will occur over time. Even if they're stored indoors in a clean and dry environment, they'll still begin to fall apart after a few years. The US, for example, recommends nearly 10 man-hours of maintenance each month on each vehicle. On top of that, even more thorough annual inspections. Speaking of the US, they are stated to have a little over 3,000 M1 Abrams in storage. Those are pretty easy to find. They are basically all located at the Sierra Army Depot in California to be able to quickly ship off west into the Pacific, or the Anniston Army Depot in Alabama, again to quickly deploy east to the Atlantic. And that's it, only the M1 Abrams. The older M60 tanks are no longer stored in reserve except for a few of the hulls used for targets. Russia, on the other hand, has many different tanks in storage. This includes some T-90s, over 1,000 T-80s, several thousand T-72s, as well as T-64s, T-62s, still some T-54s and 55s, as well as the infamous T-34, which is, however, used only for parades and other events celebrating their victory over Germany in World War II. As expected, most of the tanks that are likely able to be restored and reactivated are the newer T-72s, T-80s, and T-90s. It's also worth mentioning here that there is a difference between tanks considered in storage and those in reserve. However, for simplicity's sake, and the fact that most of them are held together in these bases, I've been using the terms interchangeably. So, why does Russia hold on to so many tanks? As mentioned, the number has been decreasing, but still. There are many reasons, but a few most notably are 1. That World War II left a real impact on the mind of most Russians, even though that was almost 80 years ago. The fact that they nearly lost their capital and they had very little equipment left to fight back has led to them always maintaining a larger military and even holding on to old and extremely outdated weaponry. 2. Despite wanting to maintain a larger military, Russia no longer has the budget to support it, so holding on to old tanks and other equipment and putting them into storage saves money versus keeping them active and operational, while still having the ability to reactivate some if needed. And 3. It takes a lot longer to produce a modern tank than before. During World War II, the Soviet Union was producing an average of roughly 16,000 T-34s a year. Today, it's about 1% of that. Even the US Army estimated that at very most, it could step up production to produce about 336 a year. And based on other modern wars, the US could lose as many as 390 every month in the event of a large-scale war. At that rate, by the 9th month, it would have only 158 left. Production just can't keep up, so keeping tanks in storage that could be brought back into service can be extremely useful. So, in the end, Russia has an estimated 6,000 tanks in storage, roughly half of which, probably less, could ever reasonably be put back into operational service. The 10, even 20,000 numbers online that you see are likely old, as the number has been and continues to decrease.